Hi, everyone. Welcome to Becoming Counsel. My name is Ibrahim, and I am a law school graduate. I wanted to start this podcast because I kept getting asked the same questions over and over again. Why did I go to law school? So, I wasn't a typical K to JD student. I didn't go to law school right after undergrad. Rather, I went to law school when I was a director of tech at a global company. I was married, and my wife and I had just started talking about having kids. So I'm often asked, why did I go at that time? Why did I sign up for an educational journey that would basically take 4 to 5 days a week of my time for about 4.5 years? It was a huge time commitment. And I've probably been asked that question by every 30-year-old person or older who's ever thought of going to law school. I guess you can say through those conversations, I've even convinced a few people to go to law school part time. Now, what's interesting for me is my technology career continues to grow. And as it grows, my time available to help non traditional students really understand my journey and the pros and cons of going to law school later in life has gone down. So I thought it would be cool to create something that I could just use as a reference to help. And essentially, if I get asked this question again, I can just point them to this podcast. So this episode is just going to start with my story, walk through my framework, and really talk through my decision and how I got there, and really understand and provide an understanding of what that was like to hopefully help guide you as you think about going to law school part time or going to law school later in life. So, firstly, I want to talk about what caused the first spark of interest in law for me. So, for most of my life, if you would have mentioned accounting or law, I would have never thought about getting into those fields. They seemed boring and I was not interested in that. Well, about 18 years ago, I met someone that eventually became a mentor, phenomenal man. And about 15 years ago, unfortunately, he passed away. And he was based in New York. He was an attorney. At the time, he had a small law practice. It was just him and his wife. They both were attorneys. And when he passed away, I was actually doing some consulting on the East Coast. And I kind of worked around my schedule to be able to spend a couple months up in New York to just really help her transition after he passed away, right? He passed away suddenly. And a part of, the help I gave her was working in her firm as she kind of wrapped up his side of the business. And while I was there, I noticed that people were coming in almost every single day. And they weren't coming in for legal matters. They were basically showing up with food or gifts, and they were spending hours talking to his wife, really just telling her stories of how her husband had impacted their lives. And you could easily see that this was not transactional. Like, these weren't just clients checking in, these were people that were profoundly connected to him and wanted to show he had a huge impact in their lives. And so I really didn't understand that, right? At that time, I really just saw lawyers as paper pushers, right? Somebody that worked a really boring job. And I asked his wife about that. Like, why did so many people come in? Why were there so many kind of deep, profound connections established with him? Obviously, I thought he was a great human being, but I thought it was weird that his clients felt the same. And that was just how little I understood at that time. And she basically told me that during the 2008 housing crisis, her husband was an attorney in a big law firm. He was making good money, he was comfortable, but she had a small law firm. And the people around her firm, right, there was housing around her firm, they started losing their houses. And so he made a decision in the height of that crisis to walk away from that stable paycheck, walk away from big law, and join her small practice because he wanted to help people keep their homes. And so, from what she told me, he dove into everything real estate related. He basically became an expert overnight. And he learned that real estate law inside and out, and he found creative ways to help people keep their homes. And he really fought for them hard. And these were, let's just say, middle class people, people that aren't used to lawyers going to bat for them, that are going the extra mile to make sure they kept their homes. And so, what he did had a profound impact. And she even told me that there were sometimes people couldn't afford to pay him, so they paid him in food or gifts or things like that. And it really was just such a beautiful story. And it really impacted my perception of what a lawyer could be. It was no longer someone that was just shuffling papers in a corporate office, but it was someone that could identify a problem and actually solve it for people that really needed it. And so at that time, that's when my perception of lawyers started to change pretty significantly. But at that time, I wasn't thinking about school. I was in my early 20s. I did not want to go to a couple more years of school. I really wanted to make money. So that idea, that interest in law kind of got put on the back burner. And then I really, dove into technology instead. And so, I have a degree in biology, so no educational background in technology, but I decided that I wanted to be in tech because it was booming. I felt like I could make a big impact, and I thought I could do, I could build some cool things. And so I am completely self taught, or at least I was early in my career. I learned everything I needed from YouTube for my first job. And so once I got into tech, and this was in the age before boot camps, I had to try to piece education together where I could. Then I got into technology. I started moving up in my roles. I went back, did my master's part time in management, eventually became a management consultant. I did that for about 4 years. And then I left management consulting to become a director of tech at a global company. And up until that point, I got to work on some really interesting problems. I built products that really excited our customers, and I felt like I worked with brilliant people. And during that journey, I developed some genuine friendships, and people that I worked with eventually became mentors that really shaped how I thought about work and life and everything in general. And so along that journey, I felt like I was making good money. As I mentioned, I had gotten married. My wife and I lived it up for a few years. So we did some traveling, we did some different experiences, and then we started talking about kids. On paper, you could say life was working out. But to be honest, there was a couple things that were really kind of impacting me as I thought about my career. My last big management consulting project was basically 2.5 years at a Fortune 500 company, building out their e commerce experience. And literally, I was focused on cart and checkout. So, literally, you add an item to cart and then you check out and you pay for it. It seems pretty simplistic when I say it that way. Obviously, it was more complex than just building that out. We had to do an entire digital transformation. We rebuilt their entire platform. We made it more robust, more flexible, and we made it more user friendly. So it's not like it was nothing, but at the end of the day, to be very, very candid and blunt, it was cart and checkout. And I felt like at that time in my 30s, early 30s, I couldn't really look back on my accomplishments thus far and feel really proud of it. Like, obviously, it paid the bills. I enjoyed what I did. I felt like I was good at what I did. And it was technically impressive, but it didn't really feel like it moved the needle in the world. And I felt like at that point, as we talked about having kids, I felt like it was something I really wanted to do. I wanted to have an option to really help somebody. And ironically, law school and the thought of that came up when I was a director of tech. And to be very, very honest, I basically made a couple of legal decisions uh, along with our legal department that, let's just say, cost the organization a ton of money. And at that time, my boss basically recommended me to get some exposure to law. And that re triggered all of those concepts. Now, he wasn't telling me to go to law school. He said to learn a little bit more about contract law and SLAs and a couple other technology specific terms. But there was essentially a law school down the street. And I thought, hey, what if I applied to the part time law schools in my city? There was four of them. We could see what would happen. I would learn more about the law, and I could basically, scratch that itch I had for a few years about going to law school and my interest there. So that was a light interest. What really pushed me to go to law school was essentially around COVID. All these tech companies, so think Google, Meta, Facebook, started laying off tens of thousands of people. And at one point, when I checked the numbers, it was like 300,000 tech workers were impacted. They were just gone. They weren't being rehired. It was like they were going into a vacuum. And here's the thing, the people that I knew that got laid off, they weren't junior individuals. Like, They were people that were very high up in organizations. Think senior directors or higher. Think of people that had 15, 20, 25 years of experience. Incredibly talented. I never thought that they would struggle to find work. And one thing I've learned in the last few years, even now after, while in law school and after, there's a lot of ageism in tech, just to call it as what it is. I've seen people that, if they lose their tech job in their late 40s, early 50s, it's almost impossible for them to find another one. So, in the people that I saw that got impacted, let's say there's 10 that really stuck out to me. And of these 10, we're talking about senior managers, directors, and even one CIO. These 10 were all laid off. Out of the 10, only one ever got another job in technology. The other 9 had to completely pivot. Some went into real estate, some went into financial planning. One actually went back to undergrad, got a degree in accounting, and then became a CPA. And so at that time, I was also trying to validate whether or not law school made sense. And so I remember I talked to him and I asked him, what would he have done at my age to kind of safeguard him from that situation. Now, I was expecting him to say something along the lines of, oh, get an MBA, learn some new technical skills, maybe build something like, build a bigger network or go build an app on the side. But that was not what they said to me. As I reached out to them all, they all said, get another skill set that's completely different than technology. Basically, get a backup plan. Something that they felt like couldn't be automated away or outsourced or made irrelevant by the next company layoff. They all kind of push for get something with a license so that there's some security there and something that you can go start your own thing with if you had to. Now, the one that did accounting, he was very, very honest. He basically said, in his 25-year career, he had built a standard of living for his family. His kids, his wife had an expectation of what life was. And so he wanted to maintain that, but then also have something he could control. And so his decision to go do accounting and then have his own practice allowed him to design the life he wanted. And one thing that he said that kind of stuck with me was that he said he could do it until he was 80 years old, as long as his mind stayed sharp. And that really hit me differently, right? As my wife and I were talking about kids and seeing so many people get laid off in technology and struggle to find another role, I really wanted something that I felt like could give me security long term. And the way I thought about law was it was like the opposite of the ageism in technology. The older you got in the legal field, the more people assumed you knew what you were doing. So to me, it kind of felt like it balanced each other out. So let's talk about me combining those three things into actually making the decision. So just quick recap. Number one, the spark was like my mentor and his impact on the people around him, helping them keep their homes. Number two was I felt like the technology we were building, it wasn't really moving the needle in the world, and I wanted to do something that could potentially help people. And then number three, I had seen people more talented and more experienced than I get fired from technology roles and almost had no way of getting back in. And I didn't want that to happen to me or my family. So that's when I really started laser focusing on the law. And I looked at a few other things, but I kept on coming back to the law because I had a combination of a lot of things I was looking for. And so at that point, the difficult the difficult sell was convincing my wife that I should do this. And keep in mind, I had done my master's degree part time. Basically, I've been in school for a big part of our marriage. I had done it remote part time. I'd been basically taking one class a semester, but still, like, it was something that she was aware of. And basically, I was coming to her with, hey, can I go back to school basically 4 to 5 nights a week for 3.5 to 4.5 years while we're talking about having kids? To be honest, it was a tough sell. Probably the most important factor was my father-in-law actually went to law school in his late 30s. He finished in his early 40s. So she had seen it actually happen. She knew it was possible. She knew it was hard, but she knew it was doable. And so we basically made a deal there. I would only do this if I could do it for free, part time, no debt, and I couldn't walk away from my job. The salary, the benefits, the stability were just too high to justify multiple years of tuition payments. So I agreed. No idea how that would happen. Did not understand the law school process, but I decided to start researching. So that's where my product brain kind of kicked in. I needed to understand the game so I could win it. So I found out that law schools use GPA and LSAT scores to build their rankings. And their rankings are, basically everything for them. That's how they attract students, funding, how they maintain their prestige, and really how they justify their existence. So schools basically are willing to give money to students that will boost those numbers. And in addition to their full-time students, their part-time students can actually also impact their LSAT and GPA averages. So schools are willing to give money to part-time students that have scores higher than their average score. So I'm in the Chicagoland area. There's four part-time law schools: Loyola, Kent, DePaul, and UIC. Now I looked at all of them, and basically I found I needed to be around a 155 and a 160 on my LSAT score. That combined with my undergrad GPA, my master's degree, and at that point a decade plus of experience in technology, I thought I would be competitive. So I took a practice test, I got a 150. I realized that the real LSAT was a couple weeks away. So I decided it was about a month away, so I signed up. I studied, and I really studied strategically. I studied on the areas I was the weakest, so logic games was where I spent most of the time. And so I took the LSAT, I got a 155. Now, not super impressive. I was probably studying an hour or two a day, really focused on that highest yielding subject for me because it was the weakest. But for my target schools, it was competitive enough. And basically, this is what happened next. I applied, I took it I forget if it was January or February, but I took it early of that year. Then, as soon as I got the score, I applied to all part time programs for the following fall. So I didn't wait a year. And I was lucky enough to get into all four schools. And I did get scholarship money. So the top ranked school, I just got accepted, no money. I was a little salty about it because I went to undergrad there. The second school gave me a $15,000 scholarship. The third gave me an $80,000 scholarship. And then the fourth, the lowest ranked school, gave me a full ride. And so the deal I had with my wife was I had to go for free. So I went to UIC Law on a full ride scholarship. And really, my thinking was I'm not trying to go to a best in class school. I'm not trying to go to big law. Really, my dream here is to open up my own law firm down the road, understand the law in a much more in depth way. But long term, I was thinking I would be in technology until my maybe mid or late 40s and then transition to law later. So that's really how I was thinking about doing that. And most importantly, I didn't want to rack up six figures of debt to chase this dream and risk my family future. Like I didn't want that math to play into me sacrificing things down the road. So let's kind of pause here, right? So one thing that we could talk about maybe in a different episode is how to break down scholarship formulas and like LSAT prep. I won't do that today, but I will say I really learned something important through that whole process. And essentially, you need to be able to filter out the noise. And what I mean by that is if you go into like Reddit threads or you talk to anybody in the legal field, they'll give you advice that applies to their way of thinking. So a lot of them are thinking K to JD, undergrad, directly to law school. You want to go to the highest ranked law school so you can go to the best big law, so you can go work there 80 hours a week for a couple of years, then exit into like an in-house job. That is a path that I think is advertised across the board. It's not a path I want, right? To be honest, I don't want to have kids and be working 80 hours a week. I'd rather be in technology, have a flexible schedule, then do some legal stuff on the side, right? That's more of something that interests me at this chapter of my life. And so a big thing that I've learned is to really look at advice and just simply ask, does this advice apply to my situation? Or am I wasting mental energy on something that doesn't matter? So when it comes to LSAT and school rankings, if you go on Reddit, for example, everyone will tell you you go to the highest ranking school no matter the debt. And some of that has changed recently, but it was always go to the highest ranking school, take out all the loans, it'll pay off. But for me, that didn't make sense. Like, I wasn't going to give up my full time job. The opportunity cost was too high. I wanted to go somewhere free, somewhere close, somewhere with the least amount of impact on myself. So you just need to know what you're chasing, right? If you're a non-traditional student, you're not chasing what everyone else is chasing. So just figure out what race you're running and then run the best version of that race. So that's kind of my story in a high level. And so I'm hoping to continue these episodes. So I wanted just to mention my journey going from like a director, being a part-time law student, becoming a dad during that journey, and really just creating a reference point for people that are interested in going to law that are not traditional students. So hopefully, if you're a non-traditional law student, or even if you are like a traditional law student, if you're interested in going to law, I hope this is beneficial. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll keep, maybe churning out a couple more episodes just to provide some more context. And obviously, if you have any questions, please reach out, and I'll try and address them in videos. So if anyone else has the same question, I can kind of knock them all out at the same time. Thank you so much, and you have a great day. Bye bye.